Party leaders closing out the second week of campaigning, making their pitch to Canadians right across the country. It was another week, of course, where the leaders were again forced to pivot campaign plans in some ways to respond to Trump's latest round of tariffs. So where do things stand going into week 3? Let's bring in our special election panel. Arif Virani is a former Liberal cabinet minister, Lisa Raitt, a former Conservative cabinet minister, and Kennedy Stewart, a former NDP MP and former mayor of Vancouver. Good to see all of you. What a nice combination of people for this Sunday. Arif Virani, let's start with you. This was obviously a week where, again, Donald Trump took center stage and Mr. Carney came off the trail, did what he needed to do as prime minister, which is giving him, I think you would agree, an advantage in this race. The fact that he is required to, but also is taking those opportunities to act as prime minister.
Well, absolutely. And first of all, Rosie, thank you for having me on. Sorry about any ambient noise. I'm at my son's basketball tournament in Oshawa. But as I drove in here into Oshawa, Rosie, we drove right past the General Motors plant, right? And it's top of mind for every parent that's in that gymnasium behind me about the impact that Donald Trump's actions are having on our auto sector, among other sectors. And I think what you're seeing is that a strong response from Prime Minister Carney, where he's wearing the Prime Ministerial hat as well as the Liberal leadership hat. And he's showing the type of fortitude, the type of knowledge, the type of composure and maturity to handle Donald Trump, to present a plan. You've already seen implements of that plan already being rolled out. And it's the kind of strong leadership that I think Canadians are demanding right now. And what I found fascinating, both in my old riding of Parkdale High Park, but also I've been helping out colleagues in other parts of the country, including in Ottawa Centre. And I'm hearing very much a discussion from voters about the fact that they're keen on selecting a prime minister and selecting a government. And it's turning very much into a two-horse race. And that's interesting in terms of what it means for the fortunes of the Bloc Québécois and the NDP. But it's also been very telling in terms of the fortunes, how it's playing out for the Liberal Party and for many of my colleagues that are seeking re-election.
Well, bravo for the multitasking there, doing your dadding and your political punditry. I appreciate that. Lisa Raitt, what did you make of Pierre Poilievre's week? He certainly spent more time talking about Donald Trump than he had before, after some criticism. But he also was saying things like, no, I'm still sticking to my own campaign because I think I'm still talking about the things that Canadians care about too.
Yeah, true. And just to answer Arif's question as well, I mean, this is campaign gold for the Liberal campaign, quite frankly, to be able to do that balancing act of reminding people that he's still the sitting prime minister. With respect to the Conservative campaign, I think that they're executing exactly as they anticipated. It's a policy-heavy campaign. Yeah. Every day there's a new policy issue coming up. And that's kind of how Conservatives roll. We like leading with policy. We like getting people talking about the issues. The difficulty for them, of course, is it's so hard to break through on these important issues when you've got what's happening to the south of us and when you've got, obviously, the need to address what's happening with Mr. Trump. And I think that Pierre was finding the balance this week, quite frankly, and he'll have to push harder this week to make sure that he is putting first and foremost what he believes the important part, which is affordability, in the spotlight. But as well, you can't miss out on that second issue, which is just trailing it in terms of importance, and that's Mr. Trump.
Okay, and Kennedy Stewart, that kind of speaks to some of the challenges Jagmeet Singh and the NDP are having as well. Certainly the polls suggest, but take the polls out of it. It is just harder to position yourself as a smaller party when Canadians are thinking a lot about this issue primarily.
Absolutely. This is a tough one. We're in a whole reset here. I mean, since Prime Minister Trudeau left, it's been a total change in the environment of which these party leaders are working in. And so Jagmeet really has to focus on the incumbent ridings that he holds now and try to hold on, because although it does look like very good news for the Liberal Party and perhaps a majority, if there is a minority government, Jagmeet Singh is kingmaker. So, hold those incumbent seats and remind Canadians of what was secured over the last few parliaments with great social programs, and just keep being himself, because Jagmeet is an awfully nice person, and I think that we need a bit of compassion in what's going to be very tough times.
Yeah. Arif Virani, let's go back to you. There was a lot of time spent in Quebec last week. That was in part because the leaders were doing these French interviews. On Thursday, Mr. Carney said, listen, I admit my French is a 6 out of 10. There is a lot of potential for growth for the Liberal Party there, but I also wonder about whether it is a point of vulnerability for Mr. Carney, the fact that he is still struggling a bit to communicate directly with Quebecers.
Well, I think The best indication of that, Rosie, is probably just how the polls are shaping up in Quebec. Certainly, Mr. Carney is going to work on his French and is committed to doing so. We'll see how he performs in the upcoming leadership debate en français. But I think what's also important is that you're seeing a similar symptom that I was describing even in the province of Quebec. Like, people that I've been talking to within the party have said that it's not just a two-horse race in places like Ontario. It seems to be a two-horse race, including in Quebec, which is really presenting a struggle for Yves-François Blanchet to maintain relevance. And you're seeing if there's a gift that Trump has given us, there's no doubt he's unifying the country, but he's also dampening Quebec separatism and the Quebec sovereignty movement, such that it's actually impeding and impinging upon Yves-François Blanchet's raison d'etre, to be frank. So much so that people are speculating whether there may be literally two political parties with official party status in the House of Commons after April 28th, which is the Liberals and the Conservative Party. So you may even see not just the NDP suffering to meet party status, but also Yves-François Blanchet and the Bloc Québécois. That's telling and very telling. I think the debates will be important, but I think Mark Carney is already demonstrating that what we need is strong leadership at the helm of a party leading a government, and ideally leading a majority government, because I think, to Kennedy's point, and I've got a lot of respect for Kennedy, I just think people want stability in the face of unpredictability. And what we don't need is minority parliaments where the prospect of a snap election will enter more unpredictability on the Canadian side when we already have so much on the American side.
I'll let Kennedy Stewart respond to that in a minute, because he had quite the reaction to that. But does that, Lisa Raitt, the fact that we are Liberals, Mr. Virani included, Mr. Carney included, are now asking for a majority government, I mean, the fact that that is even possible is kind of mind-blowing at this stage. Is there a risk of Liberals asking for a majority right now, though, I wonder?
I think so. And I wouldn't put the cart before the horse in Quebec. Because as those of us who have the experience of these general elections, a lot of times the sentiment doesn't settle until about 2 weeks out from the general election date. So there's a lot of water to go under this bridge yet. And I'm cognizant of the fact that it does seem to be a very positive position right now for the Liberals. But I'd also point out that I think it's something that can dampen. Maybe we hit the high watermark. I don't know how much build there is there, but Mr. Blanchet has an opportunity in this debate, and he has an opportunity to continue to try to put his point forward that no one else is going to speak up for Quebec the way that the Bloc Québécois is going to speak up for Quebec. And that may matter at the end of the day.
Yeah. Kennedy Stewart, do you want to take on Mr. Virani's comments there?
Yeah, maybe a little early to be measuring the drapes at this point. We've had a massive swing in polls. The other thing is, New Democrats might wake up and remember that Mr. Carney's a banker, and that's not necessarily who traditional, New Democrats would support. So, like I've said, I do think there's a lot of New Democrats over in the Liberal store taking a look and seeing what, Mr. Carney has on offer. Yeah. However, their own values may, if they see that Mr. Carney is in, he's going to get a majority, you're already measuring the drapes, and the Democrats might return to their the NDP store. So, I mean, I think Mr. Carney saying that he's, and other pundits saying, he's got this in the bag, actually could really hurt them when it comes to the polls as New Democrats, drift back to their traditional base.
Well, one of the things that would also help the Conservatives, Lisa Raitt, and you know this very well, is if the NDP were doing a little bit better. And I wonder if there's anything Conservatives should be doing to make that happen, because then the votes break a different way and support for Conservatives rises.
I think what you're seeing right now is Conservatives echoing a lot of the work that the NDP are doing on that issue that Kennedy just brought up about the fact that Mr. Carney comes from a pretty, comes from a profession that normally you would not see NDP voters want to vote for. So you're seeing Pierre he's actually echoing this and the information coming out on it and doubling down. So you can see that there's an opportunity. I don't think that the thought is that we're necessarily going to attract those voters ourselves in the Conservatives, but certainly having them move from Liberals into traditional NDP territory is, of course, beneficial for the Conservatives in some of these tight ridings. Yeah,
Arif Virani, I don't think you're measuring the drapes because you're not running again. But the success of the Liberal Party is largely due to the collapse of the NDP and the Bloc Québécois. Although obviously some due to the popularity of Mr. Carney directly. But I do wonder, because we're only entering week 3 here, whether this is a little soon, whether it's peaking too soon, and whether it can be sustained for the next 3 weeks.
Well, I think obviously 2 weeks is a long time in politics. 2 weeks ago, this election had just started and the polls are looking very different. So one has to keep their foot on the gas and keep focused on the task at hand. That's for sure. But what I'd also say is that certainly there's an element of sort of encroaching into bloc votes in Quebec and NDP votes in the rest of Canada. But I've also been hearing from a lot of my colleagues that there's now other ridings that are in play in other parts of the country that we didn't think were going to be in play. Places like rural Nova Scotia, places like rural Ontario. That's a traditional liberal conservative battleground. We just had a rally in Brampton where we had Brampton community leaders coming over to the liberal side because they weren't feeling a sense of support or a sense of momentum on the conservative side. And I'll say, Lisa and I have been doing a lot of these circuits on radio and now on TV, but what I think is interesting is that Pierre Poilievre's gold mine for conservative demonstrated leadership, from my perspective, is Doug Ford. Doug Ford made his provincial campaign a single issue about who can take on Donald Trump and do so effectively and advocate for Ontario and for Canada. And instead of attracting that sort of type of leadership and forging that alliance, he spent more time appeasing Daniel Smith out west. It just seems to me a bizarre lack of judgment and shows that he's not demonstrating the type of judgment that Canadians want to see right now, therefore causing Conservatives to come over to the Liberal side as well.
Lisa, I'll let you respond to that.
I'll just say that, that's what the Premier ran on here in Ontario, and he had an abysmal turnout at the voting poll. And I think that narrowing in on what's really driving people to the polls these days is going to be affordability. And I'm just hoping that we do have a really great turnout. I mean, that's what's going to be the key here, having people get out there and vote. And I would just say, I would add one last thing. I always believe that the soft underbelly for the Liberals, or what their weakness is when they get a little bit too far ahead of themselves in terms of arrogance. And I would welcome the arrogance to be shown over and over again as we roll in the next 3 weeks, because that's good for us.
Yeah. Last word to you, Kennedy Stewart.
I think perhaps the Liberals have hit the high end of their polls. Like, I don't think they're going to grow much more. I think probably Conservatives and NDP have hit the low point of their polling. And so, the big question will be, can Carney hold his high point for the whole rest of the election? And I don't know, if you keep measuring the drapes, that's a good way to turn off the Democrats that are in the Liberal store at the moment.
Okay, well, we'll let you all not measure drapes. We'll let Arif Virani get back to the basketball game, which is probably more important than all of these things.
Yes.
I'm measuring 3-pointers for my son right now, Rosie.
Good job.
Arif Virani, Lisa Raitt, Kennedy Stewart, thank you for spending this part of your Sunday with us. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.